Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Merci. I'm Candace Worley, Chief Technical Strategist for McAfee, the device-to-cloud security company. I've been working in the business-to-business software world for my entire career. For the last 19 and a half years of that, I've been in the security industry. And over the course of that career, I've probably talked to thousands of companies about their security programs, the challenges they face, and how they address those challenges over time. And I'm always amazed at the fact that some things have changed, but the amazing part is some things have stayed the same. Certainly, the environment that we work in has changed dramatically. The technologies that we leverage to address those security challenges has changed. But what's stayed the same is that almost every company I talk to commiserates about the fact that they constantly are challenged to maximize the efficiency that they get from their security tools and their security teams. No matter how hard they try, they constantly struggle to get more with less from those tool sets and their teams. And when I ask them about automation and their leveraging of automation to help with those challenges, what I find is that most organizations are leveraging automation for what I would call fairly remedial tasks. It's not uncommon for organizations to leverage automation for something like testing their signature files, maybe testing a patch prior to deployment. But there is a skepticism among many security practitioners as it relates to leveraging automation for more complex tasks. And when I push them a bit, I challenge them on that mentality, they give me two key reasons that they have that skepticism. The first is that they fear that if they automate those complex tasks, that there's a higher risk of something going wrong. And if something goes wrong with one of those tasks, it will impact business operations and potentially compromise the security posture of the organization, neither of which is a good outcome for the security team. The second area is really related to the credibility of a security team. It can be difficult enough to get the network ops team or the IT team to make a change in the infrastructure to accommodate security policy requirements, even when things go well. But when things go south or go poorly, it's nearly impossible to get those organizations to make the changes you need. And so these security practitioners continue to be a little bit skeptical about leveraging that automation at a broad scale. Now, what I am seeing is that there are some, what I would call ecosystem variables that are coming into play over the course of the last couple of years that have softened the position of security practitioners as it relates to expanding their use of automation. And we'll talk about a few of those today. First is really the threat landscape itself. If we think about the threat landscape, it's evolved pretty dramatically, even in the time that I've been in the security industry. Early in my time, early 2000s, it was really, I'm going to say, about mischief. Not that malware didn't do damage, it did, but most individuals who were participating in that kind of activity were really doing it for notoriety. They wanted their name in the paper. They wanted credit for being one of the best hackers. That's really evolved today to profit motivations. If we think about the kinds of adversaries that we have to thwart today, really nation states who are looking to leverage cyber as a mechanism through which they can gain political secrets, government secrets, potentially industrial secrets to better their economic position in the global community. Cyber criminals from the organized crime world. Organized crime has now decided that the digital world's a whole lot safer place to do crime than the physical world. There's a level of anonymity with cyber crime that you can't get if you walk into a bank with a gun, right? So we're seeing organized crime really leverage cyber in ways that they didn't leverage it 15 or 20 years ago. Next, hacktivism. There's lots of people out there that have an opinion about how companies should run their business, how they should affect the environment, how governments should behave. And they're more than happy to use the digital world as a way to gain information that could potentially damage a brand. And finally, and maybe the one that bothers me the most, is employees, partners, and contractors, people that we believe we should be able to trust, that break that trust by capturing information and either selling it or using it inappropriately. We know that there's a significant increase in activity because through our McAfee labs, we get pretty good statistics around the level of activity out in the world. And our global threat intelligence is an aggregated database of reputation information on URLs, on files, et cetera, that all of our products can tap into to understand whether or not, for example, a URL is known good, known bad, or gray. We see 49 billion GTI queries every single day. To net that out, that's 567,000 queries per second. That's pretty significant activity. Now, this other thing that we saw, especially in 2019, Q1 of 2019, we saw a 118% increase in ransomware. Ransomware, I think, is here to stay. It's highly profitable. It's working for people. We saw 66 new families of ransomware in Q1 alone. And this next stat, the 11 seconds will be the time between businesses getting impacted by ransomware. Every 11 seconds, there will be a new business victim of ransomware by 2021. Think about that for a minute. By the way, today it's 14 seconds, so that's not that huge of a leap from where we are today. Both of those stats are pretty terrifying. And finally, Cybersecurity Ventures gave us that middle stat, but they also give us this stat. They did an economic evaluation of the impact of cybercrime on the globe, and it has a global annual impact by 2021 of around $6 trillion. Think about that in the context of the economies of many countries around the world. That is bigger than the GDP of many countries around the world. Cybercrime has basically become a country of its own. And we're going to continue to see that grow because it's simply too attractive for cyber criminals to give it up. The next key area is organizations are dealing with oceans of data. I was reading a report by Domo recently where they said 90% of the data in the world today was created in the last 2 years. What's that going to look like 2 years from now? As security practitioners, as IT practitioners, you're going to have to figure out how to manage that data, how to gain visibility of it, how to apply security controls to it. And it's going to continue to exponentially grow. Now, IDC indicated that by 2025, 50% of all data in the worldwide data sphere will be unprotected. Now, that may be okay, by the way. If we think about it, there's a lot of data that we're fine with having out in the public. Data sheets, white papers, our already announced financial results, our web content, who cares? But we all know that there's going to be some small slice of that 50% that's information that we don't want out in the wild. How will we gain visibility of what that is, where it resides, who put it there, and how do we secure it once it's escaped our own ecosystem? Secondly, IDC also says that there'll be 450 billion internet business-to-business transactions by 2020. Now, why is that relevant to security? Well, it's relevant because historically we did physical transactions. I stood in front of my bank teller and I exchanged money with them. For many folks, they now bank digitally. There is no other person I can see on the other side of that transaction. The anonymity of business-to-business internet transactions make them very attractive from a cybersecurity perspective. And finally, McAfee did a cloud study earlier this year, and we found that there is a 53% increase in sensitive data files being stored out in the cloud. Now, given that 5 years ago, I had a significant number of my customers that were telling me that they weren't moving to the cloud. They were going to use SaaS in the cloud maybe, but this whole moving workloads and critical data to the cloud, that was never going to happen in my company. 3 years ago, they were, well, maybe a few workloads will move to the cloud. Now I literally have organizations, not typical, but some organizations who are saying, I'm going to move everything to the cloud. I'm not going to have a private data center anymore. Now, I think most companies are going to land somewhere in the middle. But the reality is, we're moving in that direction, and securing data, especially sensitive data, as it makes that transition from on-prem data centers to cloud data centers will be critical. Now, in that same report, we found that we're seeing an increased number of alerts come into the SOC from cloud applications, cloud security, et cetera. That's going to increase the demands on your SOC infrastructure from an incident response perspective. In fact, what this report found is that on average, a large organization that has a material presence in the cloud is seeing 3.2 billion alerts or events per month. 3.2 billion events per month. Of that 3.2 billion, 3,200 are anomalous, and 31 are legitimate threat events. Now think for a minute. How does your incident response team get from 3.2 billion events in 30 days to 31 events that really matter? And how do they do that in a time frame where when they find those events, they can still prevent damage? Because if it takes a month, your intellectual property walked out the front door. If it takes hours or days, you have a prayer of mitigating the risk of a loss of data. Automation will be critical in addressing these kinds of challenges as we look forward. Now, your next critical challenge is the environmental complexity that you face. Like, how many of you think your environments are easier today to manage than they were even 15 years ago? Anybody? Well, when I started thinking about this, when I started at McAfee in 2000, Windows was the primary operating system. The only people that got a Mac were the executives, because let's face it, they get whatever they want. Linux was present a little bit in the data center. Unix was present in the data center. Mobile phones were primarily BlackBerries and probably here in Europe, Nokia devices. But really, all they did is make phone calls and manage your email, maybe a little texting, maybe calendaring, but that was it. Pretty basic. Applications you got from the IT team, they either came on your device or you had to ask them for them directly after the fact. The network really was a security control, right? It was a solid edge. The cloud was something you had on a rainy day. It didn't have any IT context way back then. Now fast forward to now. The operating environments are dramatically different. We have Windows, we have Apple, we have multiple variants of Android. Linux is much more prevalent both in the data center and in the cloud. Unix is still hanging around. You have virtual workstations. You have workloads and instances in the cloud outside of your direct control, leveraging someone else's infrastructure. It's very complex. Applications? Sure, I get a few applications on my device when it gets provisioned to me, but after that, I'm going to the corporate application store. For my phone, I'm going to Apple or to Android for my applications. Very different model. The network is a ghost of its former self. It is extremely porous. And in fact, I would assert that for anyone who's leveraging the cloud, the network now includes the intranet and the cloud. Internet and the cloud, right? Your network is wherever your devices and your data and your applications reside. Mobile phones. They're now as powerful as some of the computers many of us may have had early in our careers or in our college days. As we move forward, they become even more complex. And the cloud is no longer something that just happens on a rainy day. It's IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. It has a completely different implication for us from a security perspective. Now, as we talk a little bit about mobile, Cisco's done some research recently on the mobile space and the networking space specifically, and I loved a couple of their data points. They're predicting that by 2022, there will be 8.4 billion handheld or personal computing devices in the market. Now, the reason that I think that's a really important stat is not only will it be a significant increase in volume, but those devices will also have more processing power, more storage, and more transmission capability with the advent of 5G than any of the devices that we have today. The security implications of a handheld device that now has more power, more storage, and more transmission capability means things are going to get more difficult for security teams as they contemplate mobile devices in the future. Secondly, their networking report indicates that 94% of workloads and compute instances will be processed in the cloud by 2021. So what if that's only 70%? What if they've overestimated? The reality is even 70% is a massive improvement over what I think people expected it to be. And finally, IoT. 31 billion IoT devices predicted by 2021. What if it's only 20 billion? Are we any more prepared to secure those environments if it's 20 versus 30? I assert the number doesn't matter. What matters is that as a security vendor community, as a security industry as a whole, we have a lot of work to do in the IoT space to ensure that it doesn't become a medium through which attacks can be perpetrated against companies. I think the Mirai botnet really illustrated how that can happen and made it a reality. And all of these challenges have to be addressed in a time when cybersecurity talent is scarce and getting increasingly more expensive. ESG's recent survey indicated that 51% of their survey respondents say that they have a cybersecurity talent shortage within their own organization. Probably not a surprise to any of you. I suspect many of you are experiencing that same challenge. Additionally, there's a prediction that there'll be 3.5 million more cybersecurity jobs in the market open than there are people experienced to fill them by 2021. That is not a challenge that we're going to fill or solve with a pipeline. We can't generate college graduates with the right education fast enough to address that problem. We can't retrain experienced people to be cybersecurity experts fast enough to solve that problem. Automation will be the only way that we can move forward as we begin to get closer to that 3.5 million. And that leads us to a stat that we generated from a report we did a couple years ago. It's a little bit old, 2 years now, but I think it's still extremely relevant. We surveyed about 775 IT professionals, and in that survey, 9 of 10 indicated that they fundamentally felt that technology would be the bridge that addresses the cybersecurity skills gap. They believe that leveraging automation and technology will be the only way they can get past this issue. Now, we know that companies are putting millions of dollars into security. We know that they're hiring the best people they can, and that as a general rule, their C-levels and their boards are supporting their efforts to build out a strong cybersecurity practice. And yet we know they kept getting breached. And as I've been talking with customers over the course of the last couple of years, there's really 3 key areas that I have identified that I believe are short-term opportunities for both automation and for improving the security posture of organizations. Some of these may be obvious, but despite the fact that they're obvious, companies are still not doing them. The first is digital hygiene. It's astonishing to me that in this day and age, there are many companies who months after a patch becomes available still have not patched a vulnerability, even though they know that within hours of a vulnerability being disclosed, there is often an exploit that will be able to leverage that vulnerability for nefarious purposes. This is like leaving your house with the door unlocked, the key under the mat, and the windows open, and then wondering why bad things happen to you. And additionally, patching is highly automatable. Both the testing of patching and the deployment of patching are highly automatable. And if there was any doubt about that, any of you who are using cloud applications or the cloud in general, know that that is possible, because most cloud applications and infrastructure are patched and upgraded automatically. And we accept that as a reality of playing in the cloud. And yet, we're not doing it for our on-prem infrastructure. Secondly, organizations buy security products to solve a security problem, and then they don't deploy the product. Easy solution. You can automate the testing and/or the deployment of it, or as part of the provisioning process, work with your vendors or your partners to get pro services as part of that opportunity to ensure that you get it deployed. And here's why. It is not a good day when you have to stand in front of your board of directors and explain to them that the breach that just happened would have been solved by the product that they gave you budget to buy, the product that you bought, but you just didn't get around to deploying it. And then the third area is really that we have organizations that buy technologies that are incapable of communicating with each other. When I talk to the incident response people in our pro services organization, they've indicated to me that the gaps between products are often employed by hackers as points of penetration into an organization. So as you're talking to your vendors, talk with them about whether or not their technologies are capable of sharing threat intelligence information, either by providing a platform or by plugging into a platform, to ensure that if they block an attack at the network edge, that information is in real time shared with their email security, their web security, their endpoint security. Because essentially not doing that is like blocking the guy at the front door when he knocks, but then he can walk around the house and just walk through a window because they don't know he's a bad guy yet. By ensuring that that front door can communicate with every other entry point in the environment, you can ensure that when I block it once, every countermeasure in the environment is now aware and can block it in real time. If we just deal with these three issues, you could materially improve the security posture of an organization. And actually, all three of these are highly automatable. There's no question about that. Maybe the one in the middle, that one about deploying products up front, maybe you need some people involved in that. But digital hygiene and real-time threat intelligence sharing are highly automatable today. Now, I don't know this gentleman. I just saw his quote in a research report I read recently, and I love it. I think he makes a critical point around automation and AI and machine learning, and that is that no matter how much of that we employ, we are still going to need IT expertise from the people on your teams. We will only get so far with automation and AI. And the reason is because each of those elements, machines and people, bring different skill sets to the equation. Now, Ponemon did another research report recently, a study, and most practitioners agree with Michael. They agree that in 62% of the cases, respondents felt that we'll still need IT expertise. It will be the machines plus the humans that will solve our challenges going forward. Now, the challenges we've reviewed are really going to require that we leverage the best that technology and people have to offer. They bring both to the table. Technologies like AI and machine learning are going to mitigate the risks and help to eliminate the skepticism that security practitioners have had as it relates to leveraging automation for complex tasks. And when we bring those two together, we'll make forward progress around security. Now, each of machines and people bring a couple of key kind of capabilities to the mix. Machines bring the ability to automatically gather and analyze data. They also can parse through oceans of data very rapidly, analyze that data, and provide output to humans. And the reason that that's relevant is they do that in a fraction of the time that it would take human counterparts to do the same work. So the output of the analysis is still based on very fresh, relevant information. Instead of looking at something that's now 30 days old, I'm looking at something that's 2 hours old. And that's meaningful in terms of being able to catch a potential attack before it does material damage in the organization. Now, what the humans bring to the table is really twofold. First, they're able to take the information, the output of the analytics from the automation, and they're able to add strategic intellect, the ability to understand the context around that data. Humans have the ability to ferret out nuanced information that might uncover a potential attack. They see beyond the ones and zeros, whereas automated test scripts, automation, really is just looking at black and white. We humans see shades of gray. The second area where we bring value as a human to the mix is as a second layer of assessment. There are going to be times when automation makes a recommendation to take an action that we might be a little uncomfortable with. It's like when you go to the doctor and they give you bad news, you want a second opinion, right? Well, if your automation tells you, listen, I think we need to take down a DNS server, or we need to take the CEO's laptop offline, you might want a second opinion. That may not be the automated action that you want to have taken by a machine. And so bringing in the human to really be that second set of eyes that says, listen, given the potential consequences of this action, and the risk associated with the alert that triggered this action, are these two consistent with our overall risk profile as an organization? Now, the challenges we've talked about have driven companies to start embracing more automation. And certainly, certain functions within organization are already embracing automation. I would say security operations centers are the leaders. They're leading that charge in terms of leveraging automation. We did a report a few years ago where we interviewed incident responders. And what we found is that in mature SOCs, they've automated about 75% of their processes. In immature SOCs, they've only automated about 30% of their processes. Now, that's good news that some have automated 75%. The bad news is most SOCs are more on the immature end of that spectrum than the mature end of that spectrum, right? And so as we think about that, it means that more organizations have lots of opportunities for advancing their automation and leveraging automation to a greater extent. Now, placing automation at the right location in the attack life cycle is important in terms of the efficiency that you gain in investigations and the advantage that you get in terms of recaptured capacity from your security team. We also see automations being leveraged for other functions within the company. Specifically, it adds significant value when you're looking at things like asset discovery, asset evaluation, vulnerability remediation, analysis of large quantities of data, watching anomalous behavior. And as a result of that, it takes the burden off of your teams by automating those processes and allowing them to refocus on more critical types of projects. The maturity of technologies like AI and machine learning that underpin a lot of the automation that's being developed today and will be developed in the future is really beginning to rebuild confidence on the part of security practitioners that they can automate the more complex tasks in their environment. Now, at McAfee, our belief is that solutions should deliver an integrated workflow that ranges from device to cloud to partner, and that workflow should incorporate three critical elements. The first of which is it facilitates cross-countermeasure, cross-vendor sharing of threat intelligence information. That's absolutely key to building out a solid security posture. Second is that it reduces the need for human intervention in manual and remedial tasks, and it does that by automating those tasks so that they happen without your team having to be involved. And third is that it delivers a robust policy management and analytics engine that streamlines the work of the operations and the security teams so that it helps them reduce their workload as well as acts as a safeguard on the automation scripts that are put in place. Now, by automating the tasks that play to the engineered capabilities of machines, and by leveraging the cognitive capabilities of humans in your teams, we accelerate the time to detection, we free up your human resources to focus on the most critical incidents in your environment, and we mitigate the risk that we will miss a critical cybersecurity event that may have occurred in the environment. If we deliver on this as an industry, we can harness the power of both machines and people to further the cybersecurity cause and to ensure that we're capable of securing the assets that are most important to consumers and corporations alike. Automation may not be the answer in and of itself, but automation is now capable of delivering significant additional value over and above what we could do with it in the past. And when we bring automation together with the people that we have on our teams, the experience, the insight that they have, we will accomplish more with that recipe than we've been able to do in the history of cybersecurity. So thank you so much for your attention today.